Okay, folks, welcome to today's webinar about Canine Supervision Core Competencies. I want to emphasize this is what supervisors' core competencies should be. And this is going to be another panel discussion. I'm going to go through a quick PowerPoint to go ahead and give everybody an idea of where we're going, give us kind of a roadmap for the conversation. We'll keep the screens up and then get the conversation going after that. Our primary speakers are members of the United States Police Canine Association's Best Practices Working Group. And I'd like to thank Don Slavik, Eric Johnson, Lou Ferland, Chris Butterfield, Scott Sargent, and let's see, who else is here today? Eric Johnson, I think I said that. Yeah. Oh, I think I've got the members that are here today covered. There are some others who have conflicting commitments, and but they have contributed to this conversation, so hopefully we can do justice to what they've done for it. And I'm going to start by, before we get into the roadmap, get an idea of what the core competencies are based on, and that's principles. And the principles are basically, your job has two parts. And I'm going to go ahead and throw this screen up right now as our roadmap. And as we go into this core competencies for canine supervisors, remember, you have one job and one job only. And that job is to do everything in your power to make sure that the officers under your command have the training, equipment, and are committed to the job and are competent to perform their duties. Everything else you do is ancillary to that. Make sure that your people are ready to do the job. And to do that, you got to make sure that you're ready to do the job. So that means you have to commit to acquiring and continually improving your own knowledge and skills. And you have to have the ethics it takes to successfully lead a team regularly engaged in what is, in my opinion, the most dangerous endeavor in law enforcement, because we have the only tool in law enforcement inventory that will literally drag us to a confrontation with an already resistive suspect. So where we're headed. Well, let's go ahead and start talking. You know, we can't get into this conversation without talking about policy. You have to be intimately familiar with your policy. We'll have that conversation as a part of this, because canine officers are that tip of the spear that literally leads us to confrontations with resistive suspects. We got to talk about use of force. And there's the administrative piece that comes with this. Your role in oversight, making sure that people are doing the things they should do the way they should do them. And then we'll have to talk about the ethics of the position. And as we talk about policy, we're going to hit it on a couple of points. We're going to talk about how important it is for you to review your policy, how important it is to make sure that it is revised regularly to comport with case law and community standards. We got to make sure that you have a vehicle to implement it, a way to understand how that policy gets in and gets done. We'll also talk about use of force and standards. I just had a conversation yesterday with the Washington State Police Canine Association's Trainers Board. I'm still a member, even though I retired from the Seattle Police Department back in 2021. And one of the things we talked about, they talked about was the Graham standards. And we have to realize in today's world, the only place the Graham standard gives you any kind of protection is in federal court. Departments and states are free to make laws that are more restrictive than Graham. And we have to bear that in mind. So as we get through that, we'll talk more about it, because those standards are going to drive your decision-making, and they're going to go ahead and be the benchmarks that you do when you investigate use of force and ensure that it is properly documented. And you make sure that your chain of command understand these things when they do the reviews that should be a part of every use of force investigation. Now, administration of the canine unit is one of those things that a lot of people underestimate what's required. The first and foremost thing about that is you have to have absolutely trustworthy communication between all the members, up the chain, down the chain, and laterally within the group. And anytime there's a breach in communication trustworthiness, you got to get in there and fix it. And we'll talk about resources that you need to run that unit. We'll talk about how you select people and dogs to come into that unit. Once you've got those people and dogs in the unit, then you've got to make sure that you have oversight over them, that you are making sure that they understand their core competencies and that they are prepared to deliver the job in alignment with those core competencies. Then we'll talk about ongoing assessment, how important it is to constantly keep coming back and check on things. And, you know, personnel issues are a part of this. Canine teams are different from SWAT teams are different. It's just the same way that a boxing team is different from a soccer team. One team has everybody in the field at the same time. The other team relies on everybody individually to do their best so that the team as a whole scores well. And that's important to remember. You have a different type of mindset for the people that are working in Canine, and you have to work in alignment with their perspective and help them understand that the goals of the unit have to align with the goals of the department and the canine community as a whole around the country, because all it takes is one of us to make that mistake and we go down the tubes. That means you got to train. There has to be a lot of training going on to make sure that people maintain their skills. And this is one of the things that police executives don't really get. But luckily, Lou Ferland's going to be addressing the IACP, and he's going to talk about fundraising. He's also going to talk about how important this piece is. And then we're going to get into the ethics. What are the defined priorities that you have about what comes first? What's most important as a department and also as a unit, and then for each individual handler and dog team. Then once you've defined priorities, then you got to teach people there is no greater manifestation of power than the exercise of restraint. Of all manifestations of power, restraint impresses men most. That's a quote from Thucydides, and Colin Powell used to have it on his desk at all times. And in today's world, that amounts to de-escalation. If we figure out how to de-escalate in a way that really works for people and works for the officers and keeps them safe and keeps everybody else safe, everybody wins. Going on from there, after you exercise this restraint, you got to have accountability mechanisms. There has to be some way that someone can be, once you're sure that they understand the rules, they can be held accountable for following those rules. That means giving people a pass sometimes is probably not the thing that needs to be done. You have to find some way to go ahead and make sure that they fully feel the consequences of all their decisions, good and bad. So that means accountability also means when they do a good job, you got to let them know, and you got to let other people know they're doing it. This is a part of the ongoing self-critical analysis that every unit should do, because one of the things that you have to do is align yourself with your department and the community you serve and make sure that you're doing the right things the right way as expected. And if you can't do it that, you have to make sure you let people know where your limitations are. And as you go through this, we'll talk more about the resources available to you, like the USPCA's YouTube channel. There'll be links in the show notes about what's going on as we go through this. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and go back on my screen here in a little bit. I'm going to stop this, and then we'll go ahead and begin the presentation with a conversation between the members of the Best Practices Working Group. And I'd like to kick it off about the notion of what our job is. That very first thing that I said up here on this screen. What is it? Somebody want to go ahead and take the ball and run with this notion of what your job is? When I said that it's doing everything necessary in your power to make sure your people are trained, equipped, and committed and competent to perform their duties, and that you have to commit to continually improving your knowledge, skills, and ethics to run that unit. Anybody got an argument with that? Anybody got another piece they want to throw in? Go ahead, Luke.
All right, let me get started, because even before that, I want to, well, first off, Steve, thanks for including a slide of ethics before I forget. Very often presentations don't include ethics, which is a very important reminder of everything. But before we get into what is our job, I think some of the confusion actually lays with commanders of canine units or handlers, and that they really don't know what the bosses want out of their dog team. And to be honest with you, a lot of bosses don't know what the hell they want their dog team to do. They don't even, I don't know if they're not doing data-driven type of analysis to find out what is actually going to be accomplished by having a police dog team. Be honest with you, some chiefs just want to have bragging rights, I guess, and they just want to be able to say they got a police dog team, and they just have it there as kind of like an imagery thing, as a status type of thing. And they're not throwing the training that the dog team needs their way or the support that the dog team needs their way. What I propose is before they even get their dog teams, they should do some sort of analysis as to what the heck they want their dog to do. Is it going to be a search and rescue dog? Is it going to be a detection dog? Do they actually need to have a use of force dog? Is there that enough work or that much danger in that one community, that is going to require the chief or whoever to send their dog team to that type of a training a regiment and involve all that time to have a use of force dog? Or do they actually just want to have a detection dog and leave it to that and leave the use of force issues to state police agencies, county agencies, or larger cities that might be in their area? And I'm talking to those smaller communities that have these pretty hard charging use of force dogs and might go their entire career without ever needing that dog to do that type of a task. It is just there just in case. I get that, but is that really the best use of that dog team? So before we even get into the core competencies of the canine unit supervisor or the dog handler, I think chiefs need to look introspectively as to why do they even have a dog team? And if they have a dog team for a real purpose, then they should be devoting the time, the energies, the monies, the training hours, et cetera, into that unit to make sure that they are able to accomplish the mission. And that's where I wanted to start. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, Lou, care and feeding of canine units is a paramount concern. And the fundamental reality is that canine units require a little more care and feeding than almost any other unit in the department in one regard, and that is the primary tool they have constantly adapts itself. And if we don't have the training and resources to keep that dog on task, things don't go well. And you have to make sure your people are prepared and understand the latest changes in case law and tactics, because every canine deployment is essentially a de facto tactical operation. So you might as well proceed as if these are tactical tools that you're working with. Anybody else want to dive in on those first 2 points before we dive into policy? All right, Chris, what you got?
Yeah, I'll just add real quick, and I'll make it short because I know we got to keep moving. But as a supervisor of a unit like this, or any supervisor, I think the important thing is to view your job as your officers don't work for you, you're working for them. And if you see it that way, because if you stop and think about it, that's true. I mean, I have to physically order the equipment that they need to do their jobs. I have to make sure that they understand policy and that their training is up to par and all of the, I mean, it's kind of never ending, really. But if you view it as what do they need from me, because I work for them, then I think you'll be a lot more successful as a supervisor of a canine unit or any unit, really. So that's just all I was going to add.
So Chris, in line with that, what do you say when you get pushback? So you're a first line supervisor, you're a sergeant or corporal, or some departments actually have a lieutenant as a first line supervisor. Let's say this, but you're the first person and all the canine handlers are your direct reports. They come to you. And then you get pushback. You come in and that's your operating philosophy, like you described, that essentially you work for the people under your command rather than they working for you. And then you get pushback from a commander above you saying, yeah, I get that. And at the same time, the department has needs and the mission comes first. So how do you address the concept that we got a mission that has to get accomplished, and sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable for your people?
Well, it's a real fine line. It's a balancing act, because that does happen relatively often. Right now, we're kind of having a discussion with our brass about, for years. I mean, our policy is that our dogs are use force dogs. They cannot be deployed unless we have a felony crime. Except the one exception to that is felony eluding. And so we've been in discussions with the brass about that. They want to stick to their guns. No, we can't use the dogs on felony eluding. And if you ask me why, I really couldn't give you a good answer. But then I have to relay that to my guys who really don't like that. But it's just you kind of have to sell it, like, you guys, we still get to do this, this, and this, but we just can't do this. So if we keep doing this, this, and this, and stay in the good graces of the brass, we're going to be fine. But we're just going to have to give this up for now. And honestly, here we don't get a whole lot of pushback as long as as long as we're within policy on what we're doing, and it's not bringing any kind of negative attention toward the department, which in a unit like a specific use of force unit, which Canine unit is, could easily happen. But if your guys are if you teach them the policy and you make sure they understand it really well, and when you're getting apprehensions, they fall within that policy. We haven't had any problems in years here because our guys are good decision makers, and we make sure every Wednesday we discuss new policies, not only just canine policies, but just in general use of force policies. Our policies change constantly, which I'm sure every department does. But so we're always discussing. Wednesdays our training days, so we discuss policies. We watch video, body cam footage of some of our bites that may have happened within the last week, whatever. But as long as your guys have a good understanding of all that, in my experience, you're going to be fine with the administration.
So again, that's about making sure the expectations are clear one way or the other on that, and you kind of gave me a great segue into policy. Before we do, Don raised his hand. So I want Don to go ahead and fill in some gaps for us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that as a supervisor, that's the hardest, is to understand what the canine handler is actually doing during training and what the evolution of training means as they go along in their career. And it's difficult even for outsiders and even people in court to understand how the dogs are actually work, how they actually learn. So it takes a supervisor's time to actually appear at their training to make sure that they are actually training. Now, it's problematic to understand that it will take a long time for you to maybe learn how the dogs operate. And I remember in my old unit, I'm retired from the St. Paul Police Department in Minnesota. My lieutenant and we had a lieutenant and 2 sergeants, but my lieutenant, it was a rotation thing. Every 2 years, they would rotate out of the unit. It was a command experience. The valuable piece is the sergeant. The sergeant stays longer, observes training, starts to understand what the training is all about, and then is back and forth. And he has to relay the information from above down below, and from below in a different way going back up. So there's a lot of duties involved with that, and it's hard. It's actually a hard job, very hard job, because they are one of the. We used to consider them in a way that they're like a mobile task force that could be utilized anywhere in the city or anywhere in the county, even if there was just one. So they are an important piece of controlling whatever you need to control at that time. Thank you.
Oops! Before we go to policy, I should have opened this straight with the policy because Eric's got something to throw in on this too. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just kind of following up a little bit on what Chris had talked about, is how he works for us. There's a different understanding with us in this unit for the fact that Chris was a handler prior to being a supervisor. He understands our needs, the wants, the have-tos. He understands all that from being a handler, where I think this is where the best practice group comes in handy with supervisors who are on that constant rotation that Don alluded to, that not all departments are as fortunate enough to have supervisors who were handlers and understands how we work, what we need to train, the equipment that we need, the type of dogs that we need, and the time in which we need all that. That's a big thing. And I think that's where, as a new supervisor, which I'm not, I'm a handler and a trainer. If you're a new supervisor, you need to be involved in training days. You need to be involved in all that. Don't just overlook it. And I know a lot of supervisors, especially in smaller departments, they have to supervise more than just their canine unit. They have to supervise a bunch of different things, but be very involved in their training, see what's going on, see how they are training. Is it in line with the policies? Is it in line with all that?
So we're back to the segue. We're back to the part about policy. And so, Scott, I'm going to toss this to you. because you are one of our designated policy mavens. So, we talked about the important parts of policy are that we review, revise, and implement the policy. In other words, that when you get into that unit, you better get yourself familiar with the canine policy and the department policy as it relates to canine, and make sure that it's revised in accordance with what the industry standards are. And you got to make sure that there's proper implementation of that policy. So with that being said, take it away, Scott.
Okay, I appreciate it. So a few things I think it's critical for the supervisor and the department to know. And sometimes they just don't. And that's that risk management and liability really kind of starts at the supervisory level. That's a big piece of it. Manel claims, these federal claims, state claims, they all come from what the in great part have a lot to do with what the supervisor knew at the time and whether they intervened or whether they properly trained, properly provided, or gave oversight into policy and what officers should or should not be doing. So the three areas of police liability, is a very kind of traditional pyramid. It's supervisory oversight is number one, policy and training, and they all kind of connect together. So in supervisory oversight, it's failure to provide effective supervision, poor supervisory training, and one of the big ones that I've seen when we were doing, me and Gene were doing some of these reviews around the country about and looking at different police departments, was the tacit supervisory approval of problematic conduct. That was a big one. And that simply means that supervisors that were not quite ready for the job or really shouldn't have been there or should have been there and just were submissive to the OG trainers, in a matter of culture, just kind of let things happen. And there were the policies were and procedural guidelines were not strong enough to impose upon the handlers that the supervisor is in charge and then hold that supervisor accountable. And I think we've all seen that, where either a weak supervisor just doesn't take action when we all collectively or objectively think that, oh my God, where was the sergeant at that time? Why didn't they step in? Or they just simply weren't there. They just didn't show up, and then there's no ramifications for them not being there. And so the department ends up coming down on this cop, this handler, for doing a thing when in fact the way the structure is supposed to work is that the supervisor, the leader, is supposed to be held accountable for what goes on in the field. The LAPD is big in this process, changing the accountability. Where in a lot of departments you see cops going down the toilet or getting into trouble. Really, our LAPD's focus in the past decade has been on changing that process, so it's not cops thrown under the bus. It's where was the sergeant? Who were they? Did they have the competency to do their job? Did they know the cop's job? And did they or did they not intervene? And they're the first up. So when I did use of force reviews for my department, one of the first paragraphs I put in was command accountability and command and control. And I want to know what the systems were in place, whether there was a proper chain of command, an incident command system in place, who the decision makers were, who they should have been, and whether the people at the top of the organization should have known what was going on. And this way we prevented supervisors from just skating by without being involved. I'm sending you a link, not a link, but a list of cops being indicted on the discussion. If you want to just take a look at it. This is a list that is ongoing. It's not, it doesn't stop at any particular time, but these are currently, I'm going to be doing a presentation in a few days back east, and this is what I'm going to pretty much start with, is what happens when we throw cops to the wolves and we really don't take care of them. And really, in each one of these cases, there's an element of exactly what we're talking about, where somebody with stripes could have stepped in and probably helped these folks, either as far as the unit or the cop at the time, and prevented things from going sideways. Everyone's familiar with Stephanie Moore in Prince George's County, where
Yep.
she interacted with a sergeant. First thing she did, and the sergeant said, "Oh, I guess it's okay." And then was the gatekeeper, as the sergeant should be the gatekeeper, but there was no gate on the hinge. The hinges were broken. There was no gate. Wood County was the Texas case we were talking about earlier, where everyone threw the cop under the bus, and well, they should have. This was one of those where it's a first bite paradigm, where he had to get that bite, and he didn't like the kind of bite, so he was using what he thought was clearly a bite qualified occasion to get that solid bite, to do training and improve the dog's bite on this poor person who was screaming. Regardless of who the person is, it was somebody who really didn't, under those circumstances, need to get bit. There's some people who need to get bit. And the supervisor was right there and allowed it, even though at the end there, I didn't know anything about it. In all cases, these supervisors, and we've seen a lot of these in doing our reviews of different police departments, sergeant had nothing to do. I was over here and I didn't get there till later, and I assume the handler knew what he was doing, and there's a lot of that. So, and at the expense of the cop that this occurs, because then the officer ends up getting in big time trouble. Antioch is a case where this has been going on for years and years, and there's been, we all know departments where this stuff has been going on for years. It's so bad that these guys are just texting each other, and doing that kind of thing. And these departments, some of them have been rotting for years, and it doesn't come out until there's a video, and then there's a bunch of indictments, and then they dig back and they see that this stuff has been going on for years, and there's never been any supervision, or that they've been part of these problems. And then the consent decrees come, and everybody's boo-hooing about a consent decree, that they're unfair, and everyone's unfair to them, and yet the organization didn't have the wherewithal to have the proper leadership structures in place to prevent this, and to audit and to pay attention to what was going on. So in each of these cases, the cops got indicted, and then there's several cases where cops have lost their qualified immunity, or it's become an arguable issue in court. Consent decrees are put on departments for a lot of the times because of supervision. The ones I'm involved in, that was a big part of it. Is sergeants weren't doing their jobs. They didn't know what their jobs were. And then when some of these consent decrees kicked in and they really started to look, a whole bunch of them retired. Then they had to promote again. So now you're starting from scratch.
So Scott, you're like, this is getting, I just shifted the slide to the use of force slide, because you're getting into the decision making, the standards piece and the decision making piece right there. We were talking about policy, and it's a given that the first thing a new supervisor should do should come in and be intimately familiar with the policy they're going to be implementing, and they have to make sure that people execute in alignment with that policy. This is where this being on scene, being aware of things, and even if you're not able to be on scene, ensuring that the knowledge of the standards is so clear that people will make good decisions is there.
Amen.
Because there are a lot of agencies where you can't have a supervisor on scene at night. There are a lot of small agencies out there. We got to figure out some way to do this. And in the end, if the DOJ is going to come in and charge somebody criminally, or a local prosecutor is going to charge somebody criminally, they're going to charge the individual officer first, one way or the other. So at the end, we've got to make sure that piece of the equation gets there. Do you see, if you look at that screen where we're talking about investigation, documentation, and review, those as teaching tools? They're not only tools for making sure we did the job right and dotting I's and crossing T's about that piece. But can we use those to educate our canine handlers and our canine supervisors about best practices, about should we not use them along that line? They're critical for the operation of the department. You got to have an investigation and documentation of a use of force, and you have to have a review, somebody checking and making sure it's okay. That's how this Bakersfield event got caught, was during the investigation and review piece. But can we leverage this in another way other than just checking those boxes and making sure something wasn't really bad and we're holding somebody accountable for it?
So, yeah, the bullet points you have up here are basically gatekeeping standards. Each one of them actually represents by which the department needs to ensure that officers are fully competent to complete for their job. And it starts with hiring, right? I mean, a lot of these areas are not that's not in my forte, but we've all been involved in it. So the standards of decision making, investigation, documentation, review start at the very beginning. I mean, who are you putting on who are you putting in the canine unit? We've already seen cases where we don't know how this guy even got a dog. And, you have no idea until you look back and you see that the decision making, even for hiring this person into this job, was substandard. But these bullets here represent what you should be framing the training for your dog, for your team. So I see exactly what you're saying. That's really a path by which the department can make sure that handlers are fully competent to do their job. But some of these are really vague concepts too, I mean, not for you and I perhaps, but to know so looping policy back in, to know the policy. And yeah, you can use an application, you can make sure that a person can pass a written test on a policy and know a policy and articulate it. But are they able to fulfill it, for the handler end and then for the supervisor end? So, I mean, there's different answers for how we maintain this. But, if I can just say real quick, culture is really a big deal about all this. If all this is really important to us, it's got to come out in the wash. It has to be there every single day, right? I mean, you've got to make sure that the decision making is right, the investigative follow up for bites, documentation is done properly, and for what you just said, which is the checks and balances, the transparency, review process. All this is important. But if you have people that are just simply not doing it, and then people above them don't give a shit, then you've got some problems. So there's a lot of core issues as we're going down the line, and checking boxes is great, but when you look at and I'll just leave it with this, when I go back and look at these organizations, it's a friggin' mess. All these things are very important to these departments that we talk to. Oh, these are all important, but none of them are done, or none of them are done to satisfaction. Oh, great, let's pick one. Documentation, review, and investigation. Let's see your bite ratios. Oh, we don't keep those. Well, okay, raise your hands if you can bite a GTA suspect. Half the room. Well, wait a minute. I thought these were uniform standards that you all have to know. Go back to the bullet for standards. And decision making. Well, yeah, we just decided at the time. So you have a lot of this stuff that goes back to how the organization is, fundamentally is established for not just canine, but everything that they do. But so I don't know if I'm kind of following that path, but a lot of this goes back to culture and the way things are put together and original leadership for the organization. But I'll back off this, but I've got a few other points to make on other things. But
well, I kind of want to then I want to kick it to Don, who raised his hand, but also to Luke Ferland, because as a chief executive, he's got some perspective on this. But Don, you were up first. You had something you wanted to say.
The culture part may not be in your unit, but it may be who your people go train with, that is is giving them the culture that this is okay and this is okay and things like that. You may be doing the best job in the world, but they are getting the information from other people. One of the best ways that I've found to figure out if they're doing it the right way is that you as a supervisor should be at every debrief, whether it's just you and that officer on the street. Did they actually deploy that dog pursuant to the laws and the policy of your department, and make them aware of the fact that that was not good and they need to do better next time, and understand that you may have to look at their reports to make sure they're including everything in it that's relevant, and make sure that their records are good. So there's a lot of things that are going on in that, but I'll turn it over to Lou. Thank you.
Okay, so let me add this. You know, I come from a small rural region, New Hampshire. You guys probably have cities that are more than all the people that are in New Hampshire. So the police dogs here, I think, are in similar boats to a lot of police dogs throughout the United States, and that they are really a regional asset, meaning that these departments are small. A lot of the times they have police dogs there because the handler wants to have one, and the chief wants to keep the police officer in that community. So it's given like a tool. He's given a tool, or she's given a tool, and they deploy the dog. Now, this might not be the most important thing that the chief wants to have in that agency, and yet the chief makes that decision that they're going to have a dog in that community. Well, you know, they go into it with the best of intentions, but very naively in what this high caliber tool is going to require for upkeep, for training, for upkeep, et cetera, et cetera. Then you throw in things that are not unique to New Hampshire, but are unique to smaller agencies, in that they are dependent upon backup officers from all different types of communities, operating off of different policies, having different training capabilities, officer capabilities, and so on. And you have jurisdictional issues. My first point that I was making was it goes to the chief. The chief has to know what exactly they want that dog for. Is it just going to be a toy, or is it going to be an actual tool that that community is going to utilize, need, and so on? Then I think a lot of the other problems will now go away, meaning that there are going to be sufficient resources and commitment by the chief to make sure that that canine unit is properly supported and properly policed, properly run, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I see a lot of these videos, or I investigate cases where there are questions as to what exactly was the dog team doing, there's a couple common things that are occurring here. One is, I don't think the police officer themselves are very well experienced or trained to handle that type of a call to begin with, let alone putting a dog as a tool for that. And then the other parts are they're just not trained well enough to complete the task. For example, the dog doesn't out. I mean, those are most of the cases that I look at, is the handler is shelling out, 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 and the dog teams are not outing. They just won't release the bite. And those are causing problems. My first point was the chiefs need to know why they have a dog team. And if they don't know why, they should find out. And if the community can't support it, or the department activity can't support that dog team, maybe they should figure out some sort of regionalized asset, a county asset or a state police type of asset for that area. But for those communities that do have the needs assessment to have those police dog units there, the chief of police either has to become more engaged, and, oh, God forbid, the chief asks questions and will need to learn new things about something that they might not already know, type of thing, or they need to make sure that their canine unit supervisor is dialed in and knows about managing a canine unit. You know, we wouldn't put any police officer in charge of a internet crimes against children task force, right? We wouldn't just throw any police officer into a SWAT team commander's role, right? And so we wouldn't just have somebody supervising those things either that had absolutely no experience in those or absolutely no training. And yet I see this with canine, and I don't understand why chiefs are so lax when it comes to their dog unit and understanding, one, the potential that that dog unit can make for protecting that community, but two, also the headaches that it can bring, not just to their community and to their department, but to canine nationwide, because some of these cases are going to affect how other dog units work.
I think I want to touch on that a little bit because earlier, I think either Chris or Eric mentioned that sometimes Don mentioned that your job as a supervisor is to educate the new lieutenants coming in. You know, I worked for a department that rotated anybody with a gold badge, lieutenant and above. They rotate them every couple of years. Again, it was so that they became familiar with all the different operations department. And the agency, the organization also, for some reason, I don't think Seattle was unique this way, but for people who wanted to move up in the chain of command, they put a premium on novelty, on doing new things, breaking the mold. So you take that, you take a cultural piece of a leadership cultural piece that puts a premium on novelty, and you put people in there whose life experience with dogs is they can tell you that the dog can tell you that little Timmy's in the well at the old Johnson place. Now, for the younger members of our audience that don't get that reference, it was to Lassie, and it was that basically the dogs are like, you don't have to do anything. They just naturally do all these things. And I had a dog growing up, and like all I did was we gave him food, we took him for walks, and everything else was fine. There was no problems. Why is this so hard and complicated? And this is where I want to kick it back to Chris and Eric. And I'm staying on this use of force life for one reason and one reason only, and that is, if there's something that's going to get a canine unit in trouble, it's this. And I know because I've been there. I've been that supervisor that didn't pay attention to something, and we paid a price for it. And I've also been one who tried to get ahead of things. So, and that's because I learned from some of those lessons. Sometimes I learned well, sometimes I didn't. But because I have a supervisor and a trainer, a handler trainer from the same agency here, I want to ask how you guys do what Lou just described. How do you ensure that your chain of command understands what the care and feeding of a canine unit really is, what the cost benefit analysis, what the trade-off is? They get all these really cool things about community relations, and they find people. How do you educate them on this is how much work it takes to do that? How do you educate them on this is why you have to have just the right people?
Well, so here it's our captain is actually involved in the selection process of the handler. He sits in on the interviews, but he lets the lieutenant and I make the ultimate decision. So he has some understanding at least of what we're looking for. And then as far as the training goes, I've basically just communicate with him. Any new dog, not new handler, but it could be a new dog, new handler, 12-week school. Could be an experienced handler, new dog, 12-week school minimum. So right there, you can understand how much training. That's 5 days a week, 40 hours a week of training. So they understand that. We train every other Wednesday. So it's every Wednesday. Half the group trains on Wednesday, and then the other half trains on another Wednesday. So there we have 18 hours of training every month, continual training. We also here have the luxury of our captain was a former, or he was on the SWAT team. Now he's the commander of the SWAT team. So he understands training and what it takes to do certain jobs. So communicating with him is pretty easy on what it takes to have a successful canine team. We have in the past had situations where maybe we've had to return a dog more than once, and and we get questioned about that a little bit, but again, it comes back to how you communicate with them, explaining to them, look, we can go select a dog. We drive up to Pennsylvania to select a dog. We run them through all of our tests, and it still may not work out. There's no exact science to it. But again, I'm kind of getting in the weeds here, but just to trying to explain every facet of the training so that they understand how much work it takes just to get a canine team on the street, at least.
How many times do you have to tell them before that sinks in?
sometimes several. But again, with this captain, we've had him for several years now, and we've been lucky. I know Michelle's raised her hand. I'm sure she's got a lot to say about this, but they've talked about their chain of command many times and how fortunate they are. We're kind of the same here. But with him, like, he understands the SWAT side of things, and so he understands training and all those things. So we've had pretty good success with our communication. Now, once it gets above him, it gets a little dicier because you're talking about majors and deputy chiefs, and we have none of them that have any kind of canine experience. But at least with our direct brass, it's pretty good. So.
Okay, Michelle, take that ball that he just punted to you and run with it.
I appreciate it, Steve. And yeah, I'll second all the stuff that Chris said. First and foremost, it's just open and regular communication, and not just when you need something, and not just when things are falling off the wheel, but also when things are going well. So we make a point to pass success up on a weekly basis, so they see the value of canine. And it's not just from the use of force perspective, from detection as well. Definitely focusing on the canine being a locating tool. So whether that's locating something or someone. And then also we have when we have a big turnover in our upper echelon, we have actually put a skills and capabilities demo on, an internal skills and capabilities demo that included canine, our SWAT guys, a couple other specialty units, so that there was an open line of communication and visual of what we can do. And then if there's anything that doesn't make sense or that they had questions about, we could sit there and have open dialogue about it. And that has really helped immensely as well. And then on top of that is just following it up with documentation. So I'm big on writing memos that explain why we need what we need, and putting in layman's terms to the non-canine people that it eventually makes it up to, our reasoning for asking or needing what we need and we want. For instance, we no longer have a set timetable for our new dog school. We have a minimum, like Chris mentioned.
Yeah, good,
but we hit benchmarks. And the way that I really got through to my chain of command, my non-canine people chain of command, was through a memo and then followed up with dialogue and conversation of comparing these younger dogs that look like they can do the job. They look like the dogs that we used to get decades ago that were 2.5 years, that were mature and that could handle the training methods that we all used to do or back then, not 2.5 years ago, 10 plus years ago. And comparing them to a teenager going through the police academy, that physically they look like they can do the job, but mentally they're just not ready or able to do the job or mature enough. And just making that human and dog comparison. So that has really helped us immensely. And we don't just say, hey, we need an indefinite amount of time. We regularly follow up with the progress of that dog team so they feel like they're involved in the process. So those are the things that come to mind. That's
gonna, we're gonna get to the selection slide later on, and I think that's a piece of this. I appreciate what you're getting to, and I want to jump on what you said, Michelle. But before I do, Eric's got his hand up, and I want to let him go ahead and have his piece here too. Eric, what you got?
Seems how we had two supervisors give their thoughts from the trainer handler perspective. We don't have a canine supervisor for all 24 hours of our shift. So they don't always know everything that's going on. And the one thing that we do is make sure that we give if we have a good arrest, whether it's with our dog, without our dog, whether it's a bite apprehension or a non-bite apprehension, those are all typed on a nightly, sent to our supervisor. So the supervisor knows, even if it's our graveyard guy at 3 o'clock in the morning, whenever Chris wakes up the next day and looks at his email, he sees there's a nightly ready for him to post. That way, from every officer in the field, all the way up to the chief of police can see the work that we do. And it's labeled under SOD, Special Operations Division. So that they can see all the work that we do, not only canine related, but it could be anything. As far as the training side of things, it's also a lot like what Michelle was saying, was keeping the supervisors up to date on the training. How's the dog school going? What's the good things? What are some struggles? That way, whenever they're questioned by the uppers, they can immediately give an answer how the dog school's going. And communication is the big thing. And I know with our department, our canine unit has been around, I think, for 60 years now. So we have a culture here around our unit, and the whole department kind of understands it.
So that goes to our communication bullet point about, it sounds like this nightly bulletin that you're talking about is something everybody can see. So you get up the chain and you get lateral information out there. Really, really good. I'm going to just throw one little piece on this before we move out of the use of force slide. And I want to say everything in this boils down to decision making. If you look at every piece on this, somebody's making a decision at all of these things to execute a behavior, to do something. And you can tell people how to make decisions. You can give them algorithms, you can give them thought processes, but the only way this really works is if you put them in the position where they have to make decisions. And the only way to do that in this job is scenario-based training, where you start them making decisions under minimal stress. Is this something you're even going to deploy your dog on? Yes, no. Or now something changes. Do you continue to deploy your dog on this? Yes, no. Does this shift this deployment from what its primary purpose is, the dog as a locating tool, to now the dog as a force tool? Yes, no. Oh, does it shift from a dog as a locating tool to a dog as a de-escalation tool? You've got to help people understand how to make these decisions, and you've got to let them practice it. Scenario-based training has got to be an element on this. And the problem with that is scenario-based training has a high overhead in terms of people, time, and money. And you've got to be willing to go ahead and give the people that your handlers, the other people they need to help in that scenario, people that will give them the bifurcations, those decision-making split points. And because when the time comes and somebody later on analysis, they're going to use what is known as decision point analysis. What at each step through this process, here's a decision point. What do they do? Yes, no, good, optimal decision, suboptimal decision. And that's the way our analysis should go on this. And that's where I believe that this integrated process of investigation, documentation, and review, there's a piece in here that we didn't talk about, which is the debrief, that maybe is separate from that is there, that is just about performance enhancement. And it folds in the elements that you get in the investigation, documentation, and review. Gene, is there a piece, because I see that you joined us, is there a piece that you want to throw in on use of force? Because that's where you wind up spending a lot of time defending officers in court.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Steve. I'm coming in kind of late, but my concern is, and we're seeing some issues around the country right now, is that depending upon the culture of canine unit, I'm concerned that some handlers are so desperate to get their first bite that they're engaging in unreasonable or excessive force. And we're seeing lawsuits arise and criminal prosecution arise. So it comes back to the training and supervision. Are you so desperate to get that first bite that you're willing to sacrifice your unit's integrity to do so? So I place a lot of emphasis on our frontline supervisors to make sure that that does not occur, is not occurring, and will not occur, because I don't want to see us lose our units. And I'm concerned, one bite can change your life forever, and your department's ability to protect its officer and its community can change because of one bad bite. So that's my concern right now.
And one bad bite can change the course of law enforcement canine for the entire country if
Absolutely.
it goes far enough up the courts. And we got to
Absolutely.
realize that that's an absolute possibility. So I think, we've addressed the use of force issues that we've been talking about here. And now I want to slide into the administration piece. And I want to talk about administration as a necessary evil of a canine supervisor's job. And that being said, what I mean is, most of it comes that a canine supervisor is responsible for not only making sure people are doing their job well in the field, but making sure they have the equipment they need to do that job in the field, to make sure that they have the vehicles that they need, to make sure that they get the training that comes with all of that stuff, and that somebody's paying for that training. That acquisition of resources is a big demand. And also, as a supervisor, we've already alluded to this, so we're going to touch on this. That supervisor is responsible for picking the people that come into the unit, and to a certain extent endorsing maybe the trainer's decision to bring in dogs to that unit. And toward that end, you've got to have a chain of command that trusts you to make those decisions. And that's where this communication piece. So I'd like to go ahead and throw this out. Does anybody in the group want to go ahead and start tackling the underappreciated but critically important elements of administering a canine unit that we can talk to? Because otherwise I won't pick somebody. You're up.
I think on the communication side, and I think this is the general thinking from everyone who's not familiar with canine, is that the canine is trained, he graduates, he certifies, and then we're maintaining the dog at a certain level. That is not the case. Administrators and other people that need to understand that it's a forever thing. We're always continually training. The skills that the dog learns are not there forever. They will, if not worked on, they will start to deteriorate. And so we have to put the dog in every possible scenario that you may run into. And that's where the resources and the other things that Steve just talked about comes into play too. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so we talked about the importance of training as a preparedness piece. So Don brought that up. Lou, maybe you could talk about this, having been at every level going up to the chief's level, about what it takes to get the resources to support a canine unit. In fact, I know you're working on an article that talks about fundraising and other ways to go about this. That this is an underappreciated skill. You can get a lot of good street cops that make good supervisors for a lot of other things, but when it comes to the administration of a canine unit, all of a sudden they're in foreign land.
Yeah, I guess to your money point, there's a couple of things. Well, one is, I guess it depends upon what size unit you have, and two, whether it's a new unit or an existing unit. Do you have a budget that's already there, and do you have to go out and get the money and sell a program to begin with? Because canine units need money. You need equipment. You need to buy dogs. You need to pay for food. You need to have a cruiser. You guys all know this. Everyone listening in knows that you need to have money. Handlers need to be compensated additionally too for the added responsibilities. So it costs money. So that's one of the big things for administrators, especially when they're toying with budgets the way they are. But I tell the chiefs, you have salary savings. Almost every single chief of police out there does not have a full staff. So there's salary savings there. If you figure, each employee is at least 100 grand, right, with benefits, and you don't have a position filled, there's 100 grand that's already been budgeted in your department. So somebody is saving some money somewhere along the line, right? Either the city is going to get the money back, or the town's going to get the money back, or you can move the money around as a line item to pay for other things. And so, similar to a chief being counsel, that if you contract out, like policy work or evidence technician work and stuff like that, you'll save money because you'll be able to utilize your sworn officers better on the street. You can make the same argument for a dog as well, that they are saving staffing hours. They're more efficient at certain calls. So they're actually saving some money at the calls that they are being deployed. You might have some seizure money, depending on your state laws, that you might be able to tap into, drug forfeiture funds and things of that nature. And then, of course, I don't know many programs that are supported as widely in the community as a canine unit. So there's all kinds of fundraising that you can do out there to actually raise money for the dog unit, whether it's to buy a dog vest or to buy the dog itself, or there's all kinds of people out there that are generally very supportive of not just you, the police officer, but the canine, especially as a tool that's in there. Canine Fluffy is a wonderfully popular tool for a police department. It is one reason why chiefs have your Canine Fluffy out there, is because of the PR value that dog brings to the department. But I could go on for a week as to how to actually manage and create a canine unit, how you have to budget a canine unit. But it comes down to, you need to have skilled people in those positions, and if they don't have experience with budgeting, and if they don't have experience with leadership and in communication skills and talking to people, and if they don't have experience as to understanding the training demands, they don't have skills as to how to retrieve data to support initiatives, if they don't have those, public speaking skills and things of that nature, then that unit is not going to fare as well as another unit, a neighbor unit that might have all of those pieces in place. My advice, I'll leave with this, my advice to anybody that has a canine unit is you need to get serious about it. It cannot just be the comfort dog mentality that we have the dog running around the station house on a midnight shift, making everybody feel nice. And then, oh, by the way, when it's break glass in case of emergency, this dog is going to perform at 100% like Lassie did. It's not that. And there are many out there that believe that's exactly how it works. And we know better that it doesn't work that way. So be responsible, be energetic, be ethical, and get out there and do your jobs.
I actually want to go ahead and talk about this. We've talked about dog selection as a piece of this, and I want to go to the loop end at least, because there are also a couple of you made references about the people that are come into this unit, and like, how did this person get here? So I'd like to go around the room and have each of you give me one quality. Like, if you're looking for somebody to come into a canine unit, you get to give me one quality you're looking for in that type of officer. And guess what? You don't get to repeat what somebody else said. So I want a list out of the group here of novel things, of what you think one of the first things. So whoever goes first, you wind up getting you get the advantage of not having to think of something somebody else didn't think of. So Chris Butterfield, you put your hand up first. What are you looking for?
Trainability. That's number one.
Trainability. So
Yes.
what does trainability look like to you?
A person who has the ability to listen. Do they have, so like when we have tryouts and interviews and whatnot, we will ask around about reputation. I'll ask the guys in the unit, have you heard of this person? What are they like? If they seem like the kind of person who plays well with others and has the ability to listen, I believe they're trainable.
Okay. Melinda, you're next.
Decision making. I like to look back when we make decisions on handlers. I like to look back over their use of force. issues or non-issues, if that's the case, to try to make sure that they are making solid decisions just for themselves. And that, of course, lends to how much time they've been on the street. But I like to see that good decision making.
Okay, got it, Melinda. Don, you're up next.
Great work ethic. Someone who likes to work and wants to work and is going to be there trying to train his dog all the time. That's mine.
I agree with you. I like that person that's willing to put in more than they're paid for. And that's not just as a supervisor. I mean, as a peer, I like people shoulder to shoulder with me that are willing to do that. Scott, you're up.
Someone who doesn't mind, has a history of not being offended by being held accountable. They're not always pointing at somebody else in the room during a tactical debrief. They can handle the conversation. They're willing to learn. Learning from past lessons is critical in these forward, operational units. And we all know in the room the guy that's sensitive to shit and has to blame other people, and that person is probably not going to make a great long-term handler.
Boy, howdy, that one is huge, and it ties in to the decision making and the trainability piece, and that's really, really big. That's a good one. Mark, you're up next.
I look for the 1%er, the officer that's out on the road doing the job, basically can do the job unsupervised, making the proper decisions, ties in all the work ethic, turns everything in to one little thing, and that's the 1%er that I want to come over to the Canine unit that I know is going to have a solid base to make the proper decisions based on policy.
All right, got it. Sounds good. Let's see, Michelle, you're up next.
Ability to articulate both orally and written.
Oh, I'll tell you what, an undervalued skill, but man, so critical in this job because you're trying to explain not only what you do, but what your dog did and why, and give people something they can see when they marry up, when they look at a body worn video, something like that. Absolutely brilliant. Right on. John Kerwick, you're next.
Hi, Steve. I'm looking for somebody who's level-headed, fair, and humble. I'm looking for an officer that will be fair to his partner, treat him right, and also treat the human being part of the people he's going to meet on the street correctly too. I don't need somebody with an explosive temper or someone who's not going to act should they have to. So I want a guy right in the middle who's level-headed and a little on the mature side, not necessarily in age, but in personality.
Lou, I'm going to throw out a guess that maybe you're looking for somebody who has a servant's mindset, somebody who would, for example, say, write everybody else's thoughts into the chat for all to see. But Lou, you have something you want to throw in on this?
Who, me? Yeah. This is how I would select. I want, and we all have kids perhaps, I want the cop that I would want to go to my kids' call. Plain and simple. There are certain cops in every agency that you say, God forbid, if my family needs a cop, I want that cop to be the responding officer. That's who I'm selecting. Wow.
All right. Your family's personal cop. That's the way we look at it. And I'm going to be, I'm going to throw in my own 2 cents as that I'm looking for somebody who's a good finder. It's, as cops, we're trained to be professional fault finders. We drive around 8 hours a day saying what's wrong with this picture. And then we try to pound and cut and jam things back into being order and send people on their way. But if you're going to be a good dog trainer, you have to see little successes, little bits of approximations of behavior that you need to get there. And you got to have that kind of mindset with the people you're working with too. So I want a cop that has a positive mindset and is a good finder as opposed to a fault finder. Eric.
To kind of fall in line, mine's reputation, overall reputation. That goes with what Chris was saying. Whenever he comes back to the unit, because with a department of 750 to 800 officers, not everyone knows everyone. But from a handler and from a handler's point of view, I'm out on patrol with all these guys all the time, and I know who's interested in Canine, is their reputation. We had one guy who's no longer with our department, but his nickname was Angry Bird. And just with that nickname alone, I don't want someone with a heavy-handed reputation working a very high level of force dog. You need someone that is humble, someone who is even killed. You need to know what their reputation is. And a lot of supervisors, especially in a bigger town, don't know these guys like the handlers do.
Yep. I think that kind of intimate knowledge of somebody, and it ties into a lot of the characteristics we're all talking about, boils down to the one that Lou was talking about. We have somebody who's not a member of the best practice works group that has raised their hand, and I'm going to take a question from Britt or a comment from Britt Carroll. Go ahead.
Our agency is a little different. We are running single purpose dogs. So the one thing that I was going to mention was I want someone who's a self-starter and who is proactive out there looking for work.
Proactivity. Yep. That's one of those pieces. I think that ties into Mark Darnell's 1%er and Don Slavik's work ethic piece. Really good. Thanks, Britt. All right. We're going to move on to the next slide, and we're going to talk about oversight, and we're going to talk about how important it is to pay attention to things like the canine officer core competencies, which we can't get into in depth here, but that will be a separate presentation later on. Why ongoing assessment, constantly checking to see how things are going, is important. And again, keeping up with the personnel issues, not letting interpersonal things or other personnel issues get in the way of quality work, and also overseeing training. All right. And with that and said, I think I'm going to start from the bottom up on this. Start with that overseeing training piece, because Don, can you chime in on the notion of why supervisors overseeing training, or at least even if they're not canine trainers, but having intimate knowledge of what's going on in training is important?
Sure. In brief, it's always been my belief a canine supervisor in the perfect world should also run a dog. At the bare minimum, have run a dog before. At least they can have some experience with what they're trying to supervise. They'll know the challenges that the police officers are facing. And even as a supervisor, they may not get an opportunity to use their dog as much, but it's always been my opinion you can never have too many canines. And in a pinch, that supervisor and his canine can really overcome a big burden, especially in transit where things were actually being stopped because there wasn't a dog within 15 miles per se. It's just important that the supervisor be able to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. He has to have some kind of knowledge of what he's going. And that's a big challenge for someone who's just coming into the business and coming into the industry. It's a tremendous challenge for somebody who's coming in from another position without the real hands-on world experience of running a dog.
So that kind of intimate knowledge that comes from either handling a dog or having handled a dog is invaluable. I'm in 100% agreement. What do we tell the people that are in those small agencies? Maybe one of the other people can address this. What do we tell those people that are in the small agencies where that's just not in the background of the supervisors that are available? And it's not in it, and the department has made a decision. We're not going to have a supervisor that is distracted from all the other things we need him to do by having him handle a dog. Where do you go then with that?
Well, then you better get that supervisor to some training and at least get some piece of that, especially if senior mentored people like John is saying, it's really important that you have that component built in. And if you can't have it because of whatever reasons, your size of your agencies, it's just not possible, then at least do the next best thing, right? At least get that supervisor to some dog training and at least get the supervisor exposed to what that training would look like. Do that, at least do the very next best thing. and not just say, okay, he's a boss, right? He's a lieutenant now, or he's a sergeant now, so he's automatically capable of managing a dog unit. Take the advice from the mentors, and God forbid, like I said at the beginning, chief of police needs to ask a question of somebody who actually is in the arena and is in the know and takes advice from someone like a John Kerwick. That would be my recommendation, is at least do the next best thing.
Okay. All right. Got it. Don, you're up.
I couldn't agree more with John and Lou. I think it's important for the supervisor, and I think many supervisors of canine fall into this category of not knowing much or not knowing anything about what is done. But you have to go to the training. You have to ask questions. You are, when you do that, you're showing that you're interested, that you want to learn, that you want to know, and that was good for both sides of the table there, for administration and for the handler or handlers that you oversee. You can't make decisions if you don't know something about how the dog is deployed, what the dog might react to, what the dog is doing. Attending training and asking questions is great. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've got that one covered. I want to shift up to the top here because I want to talk about this canine core competencies thing that you have to oversee. And I'm going to open it up to the group with one question. And it's the question that comes from police administrators down to canine supervisors, maybe a canine manager, maybe a lieutenant or a sergeant. And that question is, well, the team's certified. What more do you need? Why isn't that enough?
I'll start it, and I brought it up earlier in this webinar about that, and the idea that it's how the dogs learn, and that all their learning is not there forever. They're not something like us where we go to a class and they teach you this is the best cover that you can get when you're in bad shape. Dogs need to understand that there's more than one scenario that they're going to have. You need to understand that there's more than one scenario that your dog will be put in, and that the dog may not operate efficiently in all scenarios unless you put them in all scenarios. So what you're getting into the certification is a basic idea of what the dog's got. He's certified. He's ready to go on to the next level, and I'll let Michelle handle the rest.
I don't know about handling the rest, but thank you, Don. What I was going to add is we compare these dogs to elite athletes all the time. The things that we teach them are perishable skills. Just like athletes, they have to practice to maintain their skills, to better their skills, to better be prepared for the games. And the games are the deployments. So we can practice like it's real life. We can practice like we play all we want, but the adrenaline, the stress, the environment of a real deployment is going to be different. And it's an ongoing exposure for these dogs to create that, we call it the, Superman mentality, where even if they come up upon something they haven't seen before, they're going to default to all these training reps and different pictures that we've exposed them to, and hopefully bridge that gap if it's something new and different.
Okay, Michelle, that kind of a notion of overtraining, of being ready through all of the things that we've been talking about is really important. Melinda, you've got something that you wanted to throw in?
Yeah, I think Michelle pretty much said exactly what I was thinking. Thank you, Michelle, for that. But I think I get that asked that a lot. Being in Iowa, there's just not a lot of good training that's available around, and everybody's like, oh, certification is enough. And I usually come back with that just roughly speaking, I think a certification is more for the dog. And I would rather take a handler and put him into making the decisions and taking what he learned when he did a certification and putting that making that applicable to real life deployments by making it as hard as I can with training versus just a certification that to me is easy.
And I think this ties into what you just said, Melinda, ties into Kaylee's comment that, the ideal canine cop has just been built with everyone's comments. We unfortunately don't get to chance to choose. Handlers get chosen by management, who then interviews them, and based on that, they come into the unit. And this boils down to Chris's initial comment about trainability. That if at least if management if the undersheriff's son-in-law is the one that they've decided is coming into your unit, no offense, Mark, then that's what's going to happen. Then the question is this person trainable enough that you can do something with them? Can you take this person and help them be a better decision maker, fully understand policy, and do all these things in there? Can you help them learn to be a self-starter? I don't know how far we can go with that, but it's really critical. And so the loop in, let's say in the effort to do this, you run into one of the snags that I ran into. So I'm going to shift now from the core competencies to the personnel piece. And I'm going to tell a story about me. We had an officer in our unit. Lot of time and effort, a lot of care and feeding went into trying to make this particular officer successful. And at one point, the officer said, I don't think I can work with you, meaning me, because you're prejudiced against me because of some immutable characteristic that I have, that this person had. At that point, I felt like I had no choice but to self-report myself to our human relations department and have them conduct an investigation into this perceived inability to get past a perceived bias. It wound up working out okay, but I'll tell you, it was the thorniest personnel piece that I ever ran into. Never before I had somebody say to me, "You're doing this to me because blank," fill in the blank. And I'm wondering if anybody else in the group here can talk about how personnel issues, interpersonal or side personal things, get in the way of your being able to operate your unit well. And how do you keep your fingers on the pulse of those personnel issues?
Well, I know as a sergeant, our department had never had a female sergeant before. I didn't feel like it was an issue in any way, shape, or form. But there were a couple of female officers that were perceiving issues with the lieutenants, that that was their perception. And so I had to work through that with them. They felt that they were being treated differently because they were female. And I don't believe that was the case, but we had to work through that because it's really easy in this day and age to find that out, if you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. We had to walk through that, and it's not a comfortable one, but I think one female to another makes it a little easier. Now, that doesn't pertain to canine, but one canine handler to another canine handler versus the sergeant who has never been a canine, guarantee you, you're right, it's an issue.
So it may not be a canine issue, but can you see, Melinda, can you see a way in which maybe the kind of pressures of the canine job can amplify some of the personnel issues, or maybe the selection process that brings people in can unintendedly create a case where you're likely to have some friction?
Especially when the selection of the handler didn't follow some of the wonderful things that you have listed here from the last questions there. I think you open a door sometimes if you have someone that is selected in a different way than those who have canine knowledge. And think about all those things that you said. I don't know how you just have to have the ability to communicate without ignoring their perceptions, I guess is the best way I can think to say it. It is difficult.
Yeah, it's a bit of a minefield. Go ahead, Michelle, you're up.
Thank you, Steve. Again, just to parallel some other thoughts that were shared. Always open communication. So it's easy for the communication to go up a lot, but a lot of times in organizations, the communication isn't communicated down. So I think that's imperative for people to feel involved. The other thing is just building a culture of open debriefs as a group instead of one-on-one communication of maybe something that's going well or something that's not going well, so that everybody can learn from it. And I think that alleviates people feeling singled out, or like maybe you're picking on them because they don't have any idea what kind of conversations you're having with other people in your unit. So to open that up as a group so we can all learn together. And then another aspect is just separation of time from, and what I mean by that is from going from a peer to a supervisor. I think it's imperative, if the structure allows in your organization, to have some separation of time where you don't transition directly as a peer, from a peer to a supervisor. So I fortunately had about 9 months of that, and I think it immensely helped.
Got it. So 9 months supervising in a role other than canine.
Correct. I was fortunate
Right.
enough to keep my dogs and still work them, but I wasn't directly over the canine unit. I went to patrol and had that separation of time from my peers that have been my peers for over 10 years.
Wow, that's kind of a unique situation right there.
Yeah, super
Scott,
thankful for it.
Scott, you had your hand up.
Yeah, actually I made a note here. It's canine is special, right? And we all know that. Dog handlers are different people. We quotes on those. We are different people. So when you are dealing with operations as a whole on a law enforcement department agency, and you have these specialized units, especially canine, there's quite there can be a difference in the cultural dynamic between the two. So when sergeants come from morning watch, are promoted, and then they have, even if it's an adjunct duty, secondary responsibility, and are placed in canine, it's not like they're going to traffic. It's kind of a different mentality. And if you were a prior handler, it helps. If you weren't, it kind of depends on how everyone receives you and all that. But culture shouldn't interfere with integrity. Culture shouldn't interfere with effective leadership. But sometimes it does. So that's where the organization as a whole, the department echelon, needs to ensure that that doesn't happen. Because if they don't, then you have a new sergeant going into a unit run basically from the back of the room by OG handlers. And he's in there expected to make key decisions and to step up and be accountable in an environment where that may not always have been the history of the unit. You have units with 10 dogs. Some of these, larger police agencies, 8 dogs. Some of these guys have been handlers for years and years and years, and have done things a certain way and have helped develop this unit. And then you get a fairly new sergeant in there, and it's not the same as working traffic. It's a different dynamic, but they have to be held to the same standard of being accountable and holding people accountable within their unit. So that's a challenge for the organization's leadership to make sure that they're, following through on that. Make sure that. Side note: I was a captain in Newton Division down in the South LA. Well, when I went down there, every division of these cities have a reputation, right? So I went there, and the reputation there was, and it's no secret, was that female sergeants new sergeants aren't treated very well, female sergeants even less. So I had to be careful of that in this fairly young patrol thing. And oh my God, it was true. If you put a female sergeant would roll into a call and start trying to take command and control, they were given all kinds of hell. And so what do you do with that? Do you just, well, that's just the way these coppers are down here. They shave their head when they get here, and this is the way they are. No, and you can't do that. You have to say, fuck no, you can't do that. You can't treat supervisors different because of who they are, like what you were talking about, Steve. You can't do that. So there are things that happen that the supervisor has to be supported in the decisions they make, and to be protected when they're making those decisions, to make sure that they're able to make effective decisions. I hope that kind of summarizes it, but it is a big deal.
So that notion of treating people differently because of some immutable characteristic, in the instance you talk about them being female, I think there's a bit of a risk that because canine operations are default tactical operations, there are going to be some people who think, well, that's male turf. And I'm here to tell you, some of the most dialed in people I've seen have been female officers who have been very meticulous, very tight with their tactics, and gay, straight, black, white, purple, it doesn't matter to me. If you do the job well, you should be part of the crew, period. Fill in the blank. That's it. There's no exception on that. And sometimes that takes a leader setting the example for that from the beginning, and there will be pushback. And so how do you handle the pushback on that? Lou?
Listening to you guys, it's right on, right? But all situations are different, right? Every unit is a little bit different. They all have their pros, their minuses. Some are run by, they have strong collective bargaining agreements that, control a lot of the administrative wishes and the aspects. There's wellness issues that are involved. Some of our handlers are completely fried, right? I mean, we have canine units are not exempt to just general police department issues, to include harassment and favoritism and all those other issues. The problem with one of the things that I see is, it's hard to say the baby's ugly. You go in and you say the baby's ugly in your own department, and that's not very well received. And handlers who want to fix things, or bosses who want to fix things. Okay, there's all kinds of political timing that's involved, and energies that you got to do it. I mean, if everybody that's ever been promoted that's sitting on this board, you understand the politics and the timing of things, and you got to be careful as to how ugly you call the baby. And that's why sometimes it's better to get the prophet out of your land to come in, because they can have conversations that you might be having with them and have had with them for 20 years, and it falls on deaf ears. And yet the prophet from another land comes in and says the same damn things, and they listen to that person. I'm a big proponent of internal reviews by external reviewers for exactly that reason, because they can come in and they can call the baby ugly, and it's received differently. And it shouldn't be, but it is. It's just the reality of it. So if we are truly sincere and serious about critiquing and self-improvement, if we truly manifest as leaders, as the people who are in charge, if we truly manifest the ethics to say, I need to improve, and yet I can't do X, Y, and Z, well, rather than complain, get somebody from far away that has no vested interest in you or your department to now look at your department or your canine unit or whatever to make some recommendations. That, I think, is the way to break log jams.
I like it. John?
Hi, Steve. I concur with your thing about self-reporting. In today's world, I'm legally required as a supervisor, if anybody brings up some type of prejudicial difference between themselves and myself, to report it and move it up the chain upwards. And if I don't, if I play the good old boy school and go, nothing's going to come out of this. Unfortunately, once that's suggested, I'm required to bring it up, probably by department policy and federal law these days. So that'll play out the way it plays out as long as you've been fair. And that brings me to my point. As a supervisor at any level, we're given sometimes mandates or things to bring down to the people below us that just doesn't smell right. That's just probably not going to make everybody happy. So how do we deliver that? We use people skills. We use people skills talking to the executive leadership that's asking us to do something we may not think applies to our unit in the best fashion. We try to make them understand that. And to the best of our ability, we deliver the news downward and try to make it work so it's operational for the unit. If you have a supervisor with zero personality and zero people skills, you're going to be in trouble, whether it be canine, SWAT, or patrol. So it's really important too that a lot of this stuff will disappear if we develop supervisors who really are supervisors. Thanks.
And this goes back to the video we showed, I think on the first presentation in this series about herding cats. And this job, it really is a job of herding cats. And it takes a gentle hand, but a firm hand. It's weird, you know. You got to have that balance of steel and velvet in that hand to make it work well. You know, because we're running short on time, and I want to make sure that we let people get out of here at a reasonable hour, I'm just going to hit the ongoing assessment piece and say it's a given that you need certification. Even if your state doesn't require it, it benefits you. It's a given that it should be annual, something like that. But there's more that's required. And Chris and Eric and Michelle have alluded to the hot, whether you call them hot washes, after action reviews, whatever. But those things where you review everything, every outcome yields information. It's whether we choose to harness that information to make better decisions moving forward. That's the deal. And the only way you can do that is to take a look at it, do that decision point analysis. We chose this here, we chose that there. This worked, this didn't. And then say, okay, how can we take these two pieces of thing, which are affirming information and adjusting information. Affirming information is we like that, we're going to do more of that. Adjusting information is that's not in the affirming range. What do we got to tweak to get us over in this affirming range? So it's really important that this be as natural as breathing to everybody in your unit, period. Full stop. You do it so often that nobody even has to think about it. And that's the cultural piece that Michelle referred to earlier. And that being said, I'm going to go ahead and roll into the ethics one, because we've been talking about ethics here without really saying that we're talking about ethics, because almost everything we talked about here requires that somebody have clear priorities and they operate in alignment with those priorities, that we exercise restraint with our own people, still holding them accountable, because that's important for us to have those accountability things, but also exercising restraint, not coming down with a heavy hand just because we can, that we engage in the self-critical analysis that we talked about before as a piece of this. And I put this one here and there because this is where things are different in different parts of the country. And although we have one legal framework for the use of force in Graham versus Connor, the way that gets interpreted by different appellate courts around the country is interesting. And the Supreme Court has had the opportunity to tweak it, and they have steadfastly said that's our standard. And because the Supreme Court has steadfastly said that's our standard, states like Washington and California have enacted laws that are more restrictive. And everybody needs to realize that you have to operate in compliance with the laws that you are governed by. So that being said, let's wade into this ethics piece, because this is the backbone for all the others. And Lou, you wanted to hit that at the very beginning. So I'm going to go back to you to see if anything in the conversation has changed what you said at the start of the day.
About ethics in particular?
Yeah.
We don't talk enough about ethics, and we don't pat ourselves on the back enough when we do good work. Cops are incredibly good at debriefing calls to find out what we can do better next time. But you know what? The second we go and say we did a good job, or we think about that, we shy away from it. And, we need to be better at congratulating people for a job well done, and be proud of the efforts that we did that really worked out well. We're good at critiquing what we did wrong, but I don't think we balance that off enough with taking pride in what we're actually doing and how we're actually getting through those days, providing a terrific service to the community. And we often look to benchmarks like, well, what is the newspaper saying about us? And how does this person feel about me? And all these other things, when it really should just be your core that you went into the job with that says, I really want to do something different in my life and help my community out, or help this community out, or help somebody out. And over time, that kind of gets eroded, I guess. We need to be able to self-talk ourselves up and say, gosh darn it, we did a damn good job today, or we did pretty good with what we had, and move on with your life and be able to say, I manifest good ethics. And I manifested those good ethics today. And I was faced with a couple challenges where I could have let those ethics slip. I really don't think we talk enough good about what we are doing, what you are doing every single day. And I congratulate you. I applaud you. You know that I'm one of your fans. You know that already. But I want you to be your number one fan and put those ethics and reinforce your ethics to say, I did it well. I don't think we talk enough about the good ethics that we do.
And that's interesting, the phrase, do the ethics that we do, because actually the only way you can measure ethics is by behavior. Do we behave in alignment with our ethics? It's that simple. And somebody else want to jump in on the ethics topic?
Philosophers say a life unexamined is not worth living. Well, at some point, examine your own life. And are you living the life you want to live? I mean, periodically examine your life and say, is this the life I want to live? And keep moving forward.
Go ahead, Scott.
My website, I'll find the way to get to it, is a document on incident debriefing. And that's kind of what we've been talking about a lot today. And it actually feeds into the accountability and self-critical analysis piece, is that my mantra has always been improvement through continuous improvement, continuous quality through continuous improvement, which means that you just are constantly you should constantly be in a process as an organization or as a unit or as a team of self-critical analysis and internal review. And that's what we kind of have been touching on and off. And I think that's going to be more and more of a focus for Canine and for other specialized entities as time goes on, is that, especially with body cam going on, is that you can't just keep having the same stuff happening over and over and over. There has to be a process of identifying lessons learned to be learned from an incident and then learning from them. And if you're not learning from the issues and then briefing them back and discussing the issues and that's the self-critical analysis, then you're really going to continue making the same mistakes over and over again as an organization or as a unit or as an officer. And someone's going to get hurt or indicted or worse. I remember every time when I was a young cop, every time I'd walk up on a car and I knew that I fucked that up and I could have been killed. How many times have we all done that? Where we stop ourselves or in the car as on the way out, we're like, I didn't even see that, or I didn't even know that there was a group in that yard over there, or that somebody was laying down in the back seat. How many times have we come up and then said, hey, I got to tighten up my officer safety by 20% because that could have cost me. That's like a personal analysis of what you did wrong and how you could tighten it up. But as an organization, we need to be doing that routinely. And the debriefing piece, which I'm trying to, I wrote this incident debrief directive that I want to just send it out, give you it as an example you can use, or if it looks like it's worthy. It takes you through how you go through it with everybody in the room. Look, this thing went good, it went bad, but we need to talk about it. We need to improve. We need to do it better next time. So anyway, yeah, that's what I think how that all works together in this piece.
Melinda put something in the chat while you're talking, Scott, that is like, it's a money question. And when it comes to ethical things, She says, would you be comfortable saying or doing what you're doing if your chief was standing right there? That's a pretty good benchmark. But I think also the benchmark is, what if your kids were watching? What if your mom was watching? What are the people that meant the most to you that think you are, you know, a truly ethical, wonderful person? Look at this and they say, yeah, are you going to do that way? And I think that's something that you just always got to have that little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder all the time. So once again, Lou laughs at the old man's cultural reference, but that conscience there is an important piece of this. And John, do you want to kind of wrap up the ethics piece for us here?
Yeah, just on the ethics part, it's really hard to teach somebody ethics. I think it comes from when you're much younger and what you surround yourself by. So that's something to keep in mind when you're selecting people. But even in the hire for a police officer, I'm going to steal something I read in a book once, and they had a line in there that said, police work is about public service, not self-service. And if you can use that as a mantra when you get up every morning, and why do I want to get in Canine? Is it because it's good for me? I get a car out of the deal, a gas allowance, an FLSA allowance, and I'm making a little extra money? Or am I trying to actually do something with the tool and trying to help people? And I know that sounds corny, but it's not, because if I have that balanced correctly, I'm going to do really well. And the only time I'm going to get in trouble as a cop usually involves when it's benefiting me. When my ego is wrong and I deploy incorrectly, if I do something incorrect towards another person, that's where I get in trouble. But if I try to use that golden rule, treat others as I want to be treated, especially in police work, we will always do the right thing and always 99.9% of the time come out on the beneficial end of this.
And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and move us on towards our resources as we wrap this up. You know, we've talked about the nuts and bolts of what it takes to step into a police canine supervision job. And one of the pieces of this that's critical goes back to that very first slide where we talk about the importance of making sure your people have the skills and resources to do what happens, and that you are constantly staying ahead of the curve and getting yourself ready. And one of the ways to do that is by going to the USPCA's YouTube channel. These webinars are available for us so that we can go ahead and sharpen our skills. And we talked about this this self-critical analysis. Well, we have thing in there about Kaizen debriefs, which is about the pursuit of perfection, knowing that it cannot be attained, but it's there. We have a policy and procedures video there that will help you understand this. We're going to have more material that will help you understand this. So go to the USPCA YouTube channel, watch a video, click the like button, click the subscribe button, and then, you'll see more coming up. When this goes to the USPCA's YouTube channel, we'll put links in the low bar to related content so that you can find it easily. It'll be associated with this. And Don and I think, are going to sit down and talk about ways to do that and ways to create playlists about this, a playlist for supervisors that it's on there. He's already got it, I think. So the important part about this particular webinar is in the conversation. The bullet points that are up on the screen were just kind of a roadmap, but the conversations here, and it's worth listening to over and over again, because there's a lot of wisdom coming from the people here. A lot of people are here because they've made more mistakes than you have in your career. And they've learned from those mistakes and they've changed, or they can help you avoid those mistakes. And that's what we're trying to do. There is a popular instructor on canine manners in this country by the name of Bill Lewis. And he starts his things out, the things we do that get us in trouble. He'll teach for 2 days about that. And he's got an inexhaustible list. So that's another good resource. It's outside this. I don't have a vested interest in it just being the USPCA. There's good stuff, but find the good material and go for it. Your best practices working group as it stands right now is soon to grow. We've got one more member coming on pretty soon, but for right now, the members that were here today are Don Slavik, Eric Johnson, Chris Butterfield, Mark Darnell, David Ferland. Dave Green was not able to join us, but Michelle Lyman was here. John Kerwick, Gene Ramirez, Scott Sargent, and myself, Steve White. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the presentation. Does anybody here have anything that they want to say as a parting shot?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been a pleasure for us to tell you about the things we do. This group checks all across the country every day, the canine deployments. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, everybody.